Hello, everyone. This is Live Life Well TV host Robert Landau with another episode of America's Greatest Personalities. And on this episode, we will focus on the life and times of Mr. Steve McQueen. Stay tuned. When you mention what at one time used to be Hollywood male actor royalty, the following names would pretty much come to mind: Clint Eastwood, Robert Redford, Paul Newman, even Burt Reynolds. But what many people might not realize to this day is that another name you would have to include in that rundown would be Steve McQueen. I always knew who Steve McQueen was, but to tell you the truth, I just never familiarized myself with not only the movies that he made, but with any part of his life that he lived. Well, this presentation kind of makes up for all that, because after doing the research, I have found that he was a pretty amazing guy, both on screen and off. A true example of when you're dealt a certain set of cards, you got to play them to the best of your ability. Sometimes you'll make unfortunate plays, but often you will also make winning plays. It all depends on how much you choose to believe in yourself. Here are some things that the great Steve McQueen was once famous for saying. He once said, "I live for myself and I answer to nobody." He also said, "I would rather wake up in the middle of nowhere than in any city on earth." He also said this: "Stardom equals financial success, and financial success equals security. I've spent too much of my life feeling insecure. I still have nightmares about being poor, of everything I own just vanishing away. Stardom means that can't happen." McQueen also said, "When I believe in something, I fight like hell for it." Steve also said this: "In my own mind, I'm not sure that acting is something for a grown man to be doing." He also said, "I'm out of the Midwest. It was a good place to come from. It gave you a sense of right or wrong and fairness, which I think seems to be lacking in our society." And here are some things that other people have said about Steve McQueen. Ali McGraw once said, "I remember seeing him across the swimming pool and my eyes were knocking. He radiated such macho energy. Men wanted to be like him. Uptight society ladies and biker malls wanted to be with him." A guy by the name of Donald Logue from the Tao of Steve said this: "Steve is the prototypical cool American male. He's the guy on his horse, the guy alone. He has his own code of honor, his own code of ethics, his own rules of living. He never, ever tries to impress the women, but he always seems to get the girl." The singer Sheryl Crow has said this about McQueen: "Steve McQueen was from a time when you didn't know every little dirty thing about our public figures. He and James Dean were very mysterious, archetypal American heroes." Here are some things that you might not know about Steve McQueen. Steve has 4 nicknames that he was known to answer to. They are, and were, Bandito, King of Cool, Mac, and McHugh. Did you know that prior to becoming a famous actor, Steve McQueen was in the United States Marine Corps? Did you know that in the majority of films that McQueen appeared in, he played a military character or a police officer? This was thought to be because of the way he carried himself and his rugged physique. Did you know that it is said that Steve McQueen turned down roles in major hits such as Apocalypse Now, Dirty Harry, Breakfast at Tiffany's, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The French Connection, and if that wasn't enough, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Did you know that McQueen allegedly was supposed to have dinner, get this, at Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate's house the night that both of them were brutally murdered by Charles Manson and his gang back in 1969, but Steve canceled at the last minute. Steve later learned that he had allegedly been on Manson's death list. Wow. Did you know that during the 1960s, Steve McQueen was the highest paid actor in all of Hollywood? Terrence Stephen McQueen was born in Beech Grove, Indiana on March 24th, 1930. To say that Steve had a troubled childhood would be somewhat of an understatement. Soon after his birth, Steve's father left his mother. His parents would divorce when Steve was only a few months old. Steve's mother would eventually pick up and move to California. With little to no parental guidance, nourishment, or love for that matter, Steve ended up having to do for himself in a very harsh and uncaring world, in a very harsh and uncaring environment. There was no one to encourage or support him emotionally, and as you can well imagine, this ended up taking a toll on the youth as he continued to grow older. When you're feeling unwanted and unloved, you want to strike out at the world for being so uncaring and unkind to you at such an early age, and that's just what Steve ended up doing. So much so that he ended up joining a street gang in Los Angeles. Many street gangs then weren't as violent and death-prone as they are today, but still, the fact that Steve was running around with those sorts didn't bode well for his present or his future, for that matter. To that end, as a teenager, McQueen found himself in something called Boys Republic. Boys Republic was a California home for troubled children. While there, he would try to run away from the strict energy of the school no less than 3 separate times. An empathetic staff member of the school decided to mentor and coach Steve and get him through some tough times and soften his rough edges, and his caustic and rebellious personality started to ease a bit. Even then, Steve was developing a character that took dangerous chances and risked his life by living a lot of the time on the edge, something that he would always be known for later in life. There was an alleged dark side to Steve McQueen, and that would be something he would end up trying to battle quite often, many times in his life. But in this case, the smallest steps forward created the biggest waves of change for him, because once released from that intense boarding school, McQueen had to figure out how to make ends meet. He was an oil field laborer. He was a carnival barker. He was a lumberjack. He was an errand boy for a brothel, and a stint, as mentioned before, as a Marine who served time in the brig for going AWOL. Steve would move to New York City with his mother. There he would work as a bartender, but he also started to get work as an actor in amateur theaters in the greater New York City metro area. His first professional acting job was a one-liner in a Yiddish theater production. For the one line in the play that he spoke, he got an amazing amount of $40. Luck would finally knock on his door when you would find that he was offered a scholarship to New York City's most prestigious acting school back in the day, the Actors Studio. Uh, the Actors Studio was run by the incredible Lee Strasberg. I don't know why I always call him Steve, but Steve McQueen was fortunate enough to study with Lee Strasberg at the acting studio, and it was called method acting. I've spoken about this before. Marilyn Monroe was there, Marlon Brando was there, many other actors were there, and it was sense memory. So if you had a scene to do where you had to cry, what Lee would do to get you into that scene would be on the stage there in front of all the other actors and actresses, take you back into a time in your past when you were hurt so bad that you started to cry. Probably emotionally hurt, not necessarily physically hurt. And once you would start to be reduced to tears by remembering that particular incident, you would be asked to get back into your monologue or scene in the play that you were acting in rehearsal. It was very intensive training, and it brought up a lot of raw emotions that you better be able to deal with from your past. Summer stock and small TV roles would follow for Steve. He couldn't help but acknowledge that he was now on his way, and that must have been an incredibly satisfying feeling. Steve would get a film acting break in 1953, playing a bit part in a major motion picture starring Paul Newman by the name of Somebody Up There Likes Me. But a larger film break would make itself known to Steve in 1959. The movie was called Never So Few. Who happened to have been his co-star in this major motion picture? The one and only Frank Sinatra. Now, behind the scenes, Sinatra would ask Steve to be a member of Sinatra's very exclusive Rat Pack. And as tempting as that might have sounded to Steve, he declined. And he declined because a friend of his told him that if Steve would join the Rat Pack, he might never get out from under Frank Sinatra's shadow. Major stardom would be right around the corner for McQueen because he would now get an offer to star in 1963's epic The Great Escape. Now, Steve's unique, honest, and raw talent was on display for everyone to see, and they loved what they saw. He could now say that finally, after all these years, he made it, and he made it big. The 1960s saw more films with McQueen's name up in lights, films such as The War Lover in 1962, Love with a Proper Stranger in 1963, Soldier in the Rain in 1963, Baby, The Rain Must Fall in 65, and The Cincinnati Kid also in 1965. Steve would receive his only Oscar nomination for a war picture called The Sand Pebbles in 1966. A movie called Bullet in 1968 featured Steve in an amazing, now legendary car chase through the streets of San Francisco. Steve ate this up because he loved car racing. That was a major passion and a major love of his. He did his own car racing stunts in that film and in any other major motion picture that would ask his character to do so. One of Steve's most memorable and celebrated film roles occurred in the film The Thomas Crown Affair. McQueen in the film played a well-to-do thief and won the hearts of many film critics, not easy to do, for that specific role. And more films for him would follow through the 1970s. Sam Peckinpah's The Getaway in 1972 with Ali McGraw, Papillon in 1973, and the disaster hit flick The Towering Inferno, which hit the screens in 1974. There was also Ibsen's stage play that was adapted for film. Steve McQueen was behind this project, but he also acted in that film by the name of An Enemy of the People, and that was in 1977. More films in the 1980s would follow, a Western by the name of Tom Horn, and an action movie by the name of The Hunter, which unfortunately would turn out to be Steve's last and final film. On the personal side of things, McQueen would marry 3 times. His most celebrated wife was actress Ali McGraw, whom he married in 1973. But unfortunately, they would divorce in 1978. Steve loved to practice the martial arts, and to that end, he was a very good and close friend of Bruce Lee. McQueen also loved to drink, smoke heavily, and allegedly do drugs from time to time. Oh, and that reform school that Steve attended earlier in his life, once a famous actor, Steve would make the movie studios where he would be shooting films donate all kinds of things to that reform school where he was once a student. So he would make the studios donate pens, pads, all kinds of things that the school could use. That showed the world that he had a huge heart for charitable causes. As a matter of fact, he would often go back to that school and speak to the students as a motivational and inspirational speaker, telling them, you know what? I was once here. If I could do it and get through it, so can you. Just hang on. Late in his acting career, Steve started to develop a persistent cough and unfortunately could not be cured of it. Sadly, on December 22nd, 1979, the great Steve McQueen learned that he had a very rare type of cancer that's associated with asbestos exposure, for which there was no cure. Trying to find a cure through alternative means, Steve would seek treatment in Mexico at a very high monthly cost. Unfortunately, we would lose this great guy, this great rebel with the popular nickname, the Kid of Cool, on November 7th, 1980, due to heart failure. He passed during an operation to remove tumors in his neck and abdomen. The great Steve McQueen once said, "I'm not that interesting of a person." But you know what? I, for one, beg to differ. I feel that Steve McQueen was a fascinating person. He was a perfect example of what to do to turn lemons into sweet tasting lemonade, and also what to do and how to manage really hard knocks as a child, and how to wrestle and battle those demons, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But what a life, what a career, what a person, the great Steve McQueen. This has been Robert Landau, Live Life Well TV host, with another episode of America's Greatest Personalities. Thanks so much for tuning in.